So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Nicolle Hodges. Nicolle is a journalist and author and a sexual freedom philosopher. So Nicolle, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mike, the doctor.
So Nicolle, there's a million different brands that you've founded or created, however we want to say it. And I want to ask you, definitely about those ones, particularly the men who take baths. But looking at everything like at your Instagram and stuff, like you've created, so much stuff. You do work for Shot, I know too. Like how do you manage to get it all done?
I don't. I have a million half projects in my wake. I love moving between things, and I thought that was actually a detriment to my progress, or that I was holding myself back in some way, and I punished myself for a really long time for what I perceived as a potential lack of focus. But I realized that I really do love having so many things on the go. I really thrive in variety, and rather than get down on myself that I wasn't pushing one thing ahead of the others, I've kind of allowed myself to really sink into a state of flow where when one thing calls me more than the other, I shift my focus and I shift my energy. And really what that's given to me is the ability to be really discerning with new things that I take on, because every new thing that comes to me or that I think of, it has to intrigue me more than all of the other things that I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah, that's really well put. And I actually kind of work, the same way. Like there's lots of weeks where I may work, 60 to 80 hours, but it's never more than like 25-ish hours on like one thing. Like for sure, like the clinic is where I spend most of my time. But I couldn't imagine like not doing the podcast, not having my IV clinic, not having the cannabis and ketamine clinic. I also do hormone replacement therapy. Like, and some people say like, you're kind of all over the place, so to speak. But I think that like you just said, like if you're interested in a lot of things, you're going to give your best energy to the things that you're interested in. And for most people, I think it's very difficult to give all your energy into one particular thing. But again, just before we get into all the brands that you've created, like what does your typical day look like? Do you sleep less than most people? Like how do you get it all done?
I don't have a typical day. So if anyone wants to help me with any kind of organization of my day, oh gosh, I didn't want this to turn into a therapy session, but I'm
you just got so much stuff on the go. It's so whenever I talk to entrepreneurs, I'm very interested in creativity and productivity and how people become so productive, and I mean, I'm sure people who follow you kind of wonder the same thing too. Like how do you become an author and create the brands that you have, and then still manage to somehow have some type of life for yourself?
it is my life, and it's all intertwined and intermingled, and as I live I create. And again, it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I've accepted that is who I am and how I operate. And I can't remember who said it. I read a quote the other day that said passion is not what you do, because they asked, what are you passionate about? What you do is not passion, it's how you do anything. And I do everything with a lot of passion, and to me passion is synonymous with this like deep source of energy that comes with creativity and flow, and for me is really quite intrinsic with sexual energy, which is again just another source of energy. It's another reservoir that I can tap into. So when I'm feeling, I kind of say like turned on by life, which is just another way of saying eroticism. When I feel alive, when I feel most alive, that's maybe a more digestible way of putting that, I am not met with very much resistance within myself. And further to that, learning about my cycle as a woman has really helped me not try to fit myself into something that doesn't work. So there are weeks when I am feeling really high energy, very social, ready to create, ready for a lot of output. And there are other weeks and periods of the month where I need to retract, I need to go inward, I need to cultivate, hibernate, and I need a lot of like space within myself to relax. And as soon as I started becoming familiar with my own personal rhythm, which affected my sleep, my eating habits, my ability or desire to socialize, and how much I was able to do or take on or retract or not, I put less pressure on myself to be something that I wasn't in a time that my body wasn't asking for that from me.
Yeah, I certainly understand and resonate with that just because I feel like I maybe require, more self-care, so to speak, than the average person, just because, I don't know if I've taken on as much as you have, but I've certainly taken on, quite a bit, more than maybe I thought I would. And I think that when you do that, you need that time to kind of like recharge and relax. And sometimes, recharging and relaxing is sitting by myself, and sometimes recharging and relaxing is like hanging out with friends, and it just kind of depends upon the situation and how I'm kind of feeling. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that just because you do seem to have quite a bit of success on the go right now. And speaking of success, so congratulations, you were just featured in Men's Health magazine. So I guess we'll start with that brand. So it's called Men Who Take Baths, correct?
It does. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and you were just featured in Men's Health. So that's awesome. So how did you get that publication?
Well, Jason, the journalist who wrote from the first person perspective and actually came through Men Who Take Baths, our men's group, and experienced it. And for those who haven't read the article, it's in Men's Health. It's called something along the lines of like why I decided to get in a bath and go on Zoom with a bunch of strangers. Our men's groups are men who meet in their own bathtubs on Zoom and have conversations with a psychotherapist who is currently in San Diego, who I recruited to run those. And it's the evolution of Men Who Take Baths as a project, which started off as an interview series where I would put men in bubble baths and I would interview them about masculinity and what it meant to be a man. And this journalist came across the Instagram. We just wrapped our first season on YouTube of Men Who Take Baths, where people can get a front row seat essentially to the conversations that I'm having with these men in the tub. So he found that, he found it really interesting, and he asked if I would be open to allowing him to participate.
Cool. Well, glad that it worked out, and that you got the publication. I'm sure a lot of people have read that article, and I'm sure it's done well for you, and that a lot of the information in there has probably helped out a lot of other men. So
Well,
maybe I should just.
the amount of photos that I get tagged in of men having baths is kind of funny. There's definitely an uptick in the amount of tags that I'm seeing that are mostly just hairy man legs surrounded by bubbles and tubs that say Nicolle Hodges for some reason. So
Well, it's certainly must be interesting to read all your tags on Instagram. That's for sure. But maybe we should just back up to just a second, Nicole. So why did you create Men Who Take Baths, and what is it exactly? What is the purpose of it?
So Men Who Take Baths was created in 2017, right around the Me Too movement. And I noticed that something we were at risk of losing our ability to speak to one another, because a lot of the men in my life wanted to participate in the conversation that was starting to happen around sexual assault and masculinity and feminism, but they didn't know what to say or how to go about saying it. And I was like, oh damn, we are going to start to experience cancel culture, and from there we are going to have this severance, or this divide is going to start to form. And I believe that conversation is how we can create change, because conversation can instigate empathy. And empathy, as I've come to understand it, is the ability to see a part of yourself in another and love them as you wish to be loved. I think this is why we are drawn to mythology, because we can see a piece of ourselves in that, and we see it reflected back. And for a moment, we don't feel so alone. And so conversation creates connection, and that happens through empathy. But if we lose the ability to speak to one another, then we're going to feel like we're living on two completely different planets. And so I wanted people to be able to see men in their vulnerability by, again, having a front row seat to these conversations to remind us of our shared humanity. And one of the things that I think is really important, especially as we live in a post Me Too age, which Me Too was so important and continues to be an important kind of stake in the ground of this new conversation that was able to start happening. And a culture was able to start being created that condemns poor behavior. But the problem with cancel culture and the toll of cancel culture is that there has been no discussion around rehabilitation. And I think what we need to make sure that we continue talking about is how do we actually heal the divide by healing collectively, by getting what we need and want, by addressing where all of our needs and wants haven't been met, both in the masculine and in the feminine.
Well, I can certainly understand the like what you're doing with regards to like, you put a man in a bath, he's in like a vulnerable position, so to speak. So you're able to maybe
Well, he
tease
can't run
out.
away from me because he's naked, so I can technically ask him anything I want.
So basically, you put a man in a very vulnerable position, and then you ask him questions about masculinity. I'm not trying to, simplify it or anything, but is that more or less the premise of men who take baths? Is get men in a vulnerable place, ask them questions, and then see what the response is? Is that
Well, sort of, yes. And I think there's a few different ways that I can, approach what you just said. And there's a lot of symbolism, first of all, that has to do with the bathtub. If we look at Jungian psychology, we see that the immersion in the water in the bath is is like a dip into our subconscious, and through this, especially when the masculine goes into the subconscious, they're given a chance to repair their relationship with the feminine aspects of themselves and become whole. And we know that the root word of healing and where that word comes from is wholeness, completeness, right? So when we heal certain aspects of ourselves and our subconscious that we've been pushing away, and what you find in men is that they've denied a lot of the feminine aspects of their psyche, especially when they're grown up being told not to cry, don't act like a girl, don't be a pussy. It's hard to then have them want to embrace those sides of themselves when those sides have been told and pounded into them that are inherently weak. And so, yes, I am sitting across from a man who is in a bubble bath, who is naked, and I'm asking him questions about masculinity, but more so I'm asking him questions about his lived experience. What is it like to be a man? What's hard about being a man? How can women include men in the feminist movement? Help me learn what it's like to be you so that I can create opportunities for us to work better together. We spend a lot of time asking men to get on board with feminism, and feminism, as I've come to understand it and define it for myself, really is the desire for equality, right? It's the desire for us all to have the ability, free from judgment, or at least free from pain or risk to our safety, to be able to express ourselves. So if I can learn how men work and what it's like to be a man, the closest I can possibly get to understanding what it's like for you, then I can bring what I'm good at to the table, which is communication and community building, and create worlds in which you understand the roles and goals of feminism.
okay? So then, it's not only beneficial, obviously, for the men that are doing it, but it would be beneficial for women, particularly the women who are in relationships with this men, because they can perhaps bring out some vulnerabilities or some topics of conversation that they may not bring up otherwise if they weren't in such a vulnerable position. And so when you're doing this with these men, is there and maybe everyone's experience that you've interviewed is very different, but are there any like underlying themes that you that seem to come out between all the conversations, or is everyone kind of very unique and different overall?
Well, I've done something where, I started this in 2017, and I plan on running this. I kind of set out saying it was a decade-long project, but who knows if it'll be longer than that, or what will come of it and what the evolution will be. But something that was really important to me from the very beginning is I wanted to ask the same questions, to show that you can ask the same questions to men and get wildly different answers. And not only that, but what's been really interesting, documenting the difference between the answers that I got to these similar questions, or the same questions, in 2017 versus something like 2021. What I found is, a few things. Men want to learn how to heal.
Mm-hmm.
men want guidance, which I think goes against a lot of the things that we think. But the other work that I do with female sexual empowerment has really shown me that men want to, in a sense, surrender. They don't want to feel, and again, I'm making generalizations, but this is kind of a theme that I've noticed. They
Mhm.
don't want to feel like they have to always lead or that they have to do it on their own. So in order for them to feel safe in that surrender, women also need to decondition themselves from not stepping up and leading. And what's really interesting, especially when we're talking about cancel culture, is women really do. And I'm going to speak in binary terms right now, men and women. I know that though gender is a social construct, and that there's, you know, genders on a spectrum and all of that. Just wanted to add that as a caveat. I'm just speaking about men and women, which could also just be speaking about the masculine and the feminine. But women have an amazing opportunity right now to lead from a heart-centered place. But men have to trust that if they let go of their perceived control, the world is not going to fall apart.
Okay.
And they've been told that they need to lead, and that masculinity is this one thing. It's holding everything together, and that includes holding yourself together and holding your emotions in. If we are asking men to let go of that idea, then women also need to step up and show that we can be trusted to lead from a heart-centered place. That is not going to mean turning around and saying everything you've done is wrong and now we're going to subjugate you in return.
Yeah, I think that, and I mean, this, is something that, not just applies just to what you're doing, but people don't like being vulnerable a lot of the times, because if you're vulnerable with someone, like, you are putting yourself at risk. You're putting yourself at risk of someone maybe using that information against you at a later date. And, that can be very, very hurtful to people, which is, I think, a lot why a lot of people, are not vulnerable. And
If
like,
the vulnerability is feeling exposed, but
yeah.
if vulnerability is, and like, okay, well, here's a question, like, what is your definition of vulnerability?
Vulnerability, I would say, is something when you feel comfortable with another person expressing whatever you actually feel. There's kind of, and this comes up in your article a little bit because I did read it. And it was I think one of the main points. It's like, we kind of have two faces. There's kind of like who we show our face to the world, who we are. And then there's like who we really are, and I think that some people, feel like they always have to put on that face, and that they can never be vulnerable. And I think that a lot of the times when people are not vulnerable, it maybe has been because they've been burned with it in the past. Maybe they shared something with someone that, was very, very vulnerable, and then, a week later when they got into a fight, they bring this up, and then because of that, the person never wants to be, vulnerable again, because when they did it, they were hurt. Which brings me back to your point that you said that, like, if men are going to do this, well, then women need to do it, need to come into it with an open heart.
Yeah.
They need to accept these things. And so, I do, agree with you on that. One thing though too, like, I know this. You mentioned the word, earlier. You said, like, don't be a pussy, right? It's something that people would say to one another, and like, but do you think that there's, like, zero therapeutic value in someone saying to someone else, like, don't be a fucking pussy? Like, do you think there's always zero therapeutic value in that, or do you think that sometimes maybe some people do need to be told stop being a fucking pussy?
Okay, listen, I know you've tweeted about this before,
Okay.
and I called you out on it, and I don't know if you remember this.
I don't actually. I don't think we knew each other then.
We didn't, but you deleted the tweet
Okay.
because I said something about, because I commented on you using the term pussy.
Yeah.
And like, here's the thing, like, therapeutic value, I get what the underlying therapeutic value is in being direct with people sometimes.
Hmm.
Is it necessary to use something like pussy? I I don't know. I actually, this is a conversation I had with my dad this morning because he posted something on Facebook and it said, "Did you know that the blue whale has a pussy so large that it can fit 6 men into it? That means it's the second largest pussy in the world besides people who don't wear masks."
That's
And I
amazing.
was like,
I like that.
Father, do you know what I do for a living? What if someone sees that and they go, "Oh, this is Nicolle Hodges' dad here talking about pussies." And we had to have a little bit of a discussion about it. And then, as with all discussions with my dad, I say, "And dad, please, after this discussion, don't die. Otherwise, at your funeral, I'm going to have to tell everybody that the last thing we talked about was pussy. And that's weird. So, love you, dad." But so I get the humor in it. And even he brought it up. Well, Nicolle, I'm just using it to make a point and I'm just using it in a humorous way. I also know that in the UK, they throw around the word cunt like it's really no big deal. Everyone's a cunt. Good morning, cunt. And then people out here have an absolute uproar about using the term cunt.
I like that term. I use the term cunt and cunty quite frequently, actually.
Well, I even have a book that's the reclamation of the word cunt, and much like many women are trying to reclaim certain words that have been used against us, such as the word slut. So I get the like, is it really a big deal to use the term pussy argument? The only thing that I would say to that is then let's do a better job at teaching daughters and young women that her pussy is powerful. Because if a young girl is out on a field in the playground and all she hears from boys is "don't be a pussy, don't be a pussy," and she's seeing that that is synonymous with them not, or with them behaving a certain way, her first association with that word, therefore with herself, as that is part of her, is going to be negative. But if she in the household has already been taught that her pussy is powerful and strong and she's awesome and all of these things, then when she hears that word, she's going to go, "Oh, what's the big deal? They've got it all wrong anyway." So all I'm saying is, if we're going to advocate for the casual use of certain terminology and words, then let's make
Yeah.
sure that we're also balancing that out by teaching that that actually means that you're strong as fuck.
Okay. Yeah, I like that response. I think that's a real good answer to that. And it's something that I still like, struggle with. And, I can't remember that particular tweet, but obviously, maybe I disagreed with myself if I deleted it afterwards, or maybe it was just really poorly
I think
received.
you were just intimidated by me. It's okay. You can say it.
Okay, that's exactly what happened as well. But I think that when you're talking about that, I think there really is some instances where, like, when you're saying something like that, maybe not, you know, all the time, but I think there are some instances where, like, that language may in fact be helpful. Like, is there other language that you could probably use? Probably. But I also think that, there's definitely times when that has been, been therapeutically valued for
Can you
some
give me
people.
an example? I'm so curious.
Okay, so say if you are at an MMA gym and some guy doesn't want to spar, you might say to him, like, listen, stop being a fucking pussy, just get in there. And then the guy gets in there, he spars, and then he comes over after, he's like, man, thank you for fucking telling me that. Like, I really needed to, like, get that out of me today, and I feel so much better for it.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you didn't say that, then maybe he just would have sat on the sidelines, and it would have, he wouldn't have gotten that opportunity. And just to kind of go back a little bit to the bass thing, though, like, there's nothing like, when you're putting someone in a bath, a man in a bath, you're putting them in a vulnerable position. You're basically making them be humble in certain ways, right? They're in a very humbling position at that time. And in that instance, like, if you are in an MMA gym and you're sparring with someone, and particularly if you lose, like, I don't think there's anything, particularly for a man, there's nothing more humbling, I don't think, than getting beaten up by someone else. So I think that it's true, though. You can ask guys, they will tell you that if they ever got their ass kicked, they will remember, like, what it felt like. It feels like the worst.
Mm.
So like in that position, after you said this thing of like, don't be a fucking pussy, that actually created a chain of events where the person actually got more humble, and I know that that's sort of like a strange example to use, and there's probably many examples where people have said, don't be a fucking pussy, and it's been, horrible, it hasn't worked out well. But I think that, and it's hard to say though, when that example can be used and when it can't be used, so
It's
it's
interesting.
it's
You know where the word humble comes from, or what the root of the word humble is?
uh Kendrick Lamar.
No. Great answer. It means to be of the earth. So
Of the earth.
to be humble, the Latin root of humble means to be of the earth. So to be humbled means to really return to your roots, return to the ground, put your feet back on the ground.
Okay.
So I think that's really interesting. And also like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to like take this too far psychologically, but maybe to say don't be a pussy means like, yeah, I don't know. Don't I'm just like, is it like don't be weak? Because why can't you just say like don't be a saggy ball sack? That just doesn't hit
Yeah.
the
Or even better, like maybe just like step up and do it, like just more of like words of like encouragement, maybe that's what we need, more words of encouragement,
but
and this.
you're saying that it's like the don't be whatever means then be all the other things that you could be except for this one thing. And I get that, I get again like that it's not necessarily something that you might even think of saying as a derogatory term, but I really do love examining language. And even I'm doing an awareness campaign around rebranding the term virginity to sexual debut, because certain words that we say carry with it an inherent implication of weakness, and most of that has to do with women or biologically genitals, something being lesser than, or being something you don't want to be, something you want to grow away from. So how can we ask of men to reconcile certain aspects within themselves in order to become whole again if they're conditioned to believe that the things that are feminine are weak? So yeah, maybe it's just, maybe this isn't a good discussion and debate without necessarily an answer, but I think it's an interesting point that you bring up. Being able to say to someone don't be a pussy actually potentially has the potential to make them perform better.
Yeah, it's again, like I don't know the answer to it. I'm just having a discussion with you on it because I do feel that it's a worthy discussion to have, and maybe someone else who's listening to this will say something that both of us agree with, and then we can kind of put it to rest, or maybe it'll be a discussion for a long time. We'll kind of see. I do think it's a pretty complicated subject.
Yeah.
So one question too I wanted to ask you on this. So in the last few years, this term, toxic masculinity has come up, quite a bit. When you created Men Who Take Baths, was that like part of the reason why you were trying to do it? And like, what do you think of that term in general?
Yeah, so there were actually a couple of things that came up in terms of terminology around the time that Men Who Take Baths was born and Me Too happened. I remember I was in Portland and I was walking down the street and I passed by a shop, and all of the paraphernalia in the shop said the future is female. And I was like, ooh, interesting. And then I heard an article about a young boy, I think, who had worn a shirt to school that said the future is male, and he got pulled aside and he wasn't able to wear it. Something along those lines. I would have to dig it up and find exactly what it was, but basically saying that it's okay to say the future is female, it's not okay to say the future is male. And then we see the rise of this term toxic masculinity. And I understand the need for at the time, the wrecking ball that obliterated a lot of bad behavior post Me Too. And I understand how, in terms of marketing, capitalizing on the beginning stages of a movement that is trying to really push for dismantling patriarchy, which has a negative effect on all of us. But again, I kept coming back to, when you tell people that they're toxic, how does that entice them at all to come into your movement and support it. When
Mhm.
you tell people that the future, that you don't actually belong in the future because the future is something that you're not, how is that pushing towards, and how is that making progress towards a future of equality? And so those are a couple things that came up around the time of Me Too. In terms of my own views of toxic masculinity, I understand that not all forms of masculinity are toxic.
What would be toxic though? Like, just give us an example of what toxic masculinity is.
Domineering, oppressive traits that seek to subjugate in order to keep someone, male, in a position of perceived power, reliant on others being subservient to them in order to keep them there.
Okay.
Acts of violence are encompassed in that. Psychological manipulation is encompassed in that. Believing that power is a birthright and something that one must hold on to at all costs. Putting other people down, using physical force in order to get what one wants at the expense of the safety of another.
Do you feel though that we are in a bit of a crisis of masculinity overall, and that there are a lot of men out there these days who are a little bit too feminine?
Oh my God, this is so fun. Let us mental spar on this topic. I can't believe you brought, okay, this is so exciting. So what do you mean by too feminine?
Um, okay, do you feel that, okay, there's a lot of women out there now who feel that they can't find a partner because they feel that a lot of men out there are not masculine, they're not the way that men used to be, and that they, act again in this, I know it's a broad term, but in a feminine sense, and some of that really is just like, point blank, just like not having your shit together. You know what I mean? So like, do you feel that like we're in a crisis? Do you feel like there's less available good men for strong women? Because, and I know that we've chatted about Jordan Peterson briefly, but I know in his first book he said that like, if you're a woman who's, attractive, you're smart, and you have a good personality, there's a couple other things that he put in there, it's going to be very difficult, he said, for you to find, a mate these days, because it's going to be hard for you to, find someone who kind of like matches you. And I'm just wondering if you agree with that statement.
Wow. Okay, you said a lot of things, and I think what I can boil it down to is polarity, and polarity is not gender specific, but it's about the, like, masculine energy and feminine energy. So if you have a certain type of energy and you are in tune with what that is, you are going to attract a certain type of energy that is in opposition, complementary to you by being the opposite. And so if they're in the hypothetical, like a strong woman, which strong is then you could say like masculine, like she's in her masculine energy, right? If she's like leading, um if she's in her masculine energy, she will then attract men who are in their feminine energy. If she's if the type of people that she's attracting are not people that she's actually attracted to, it's an opportunity to evaluate if she is actually operating from the energy center that she wants to be operating from in order to attract a lover. I boil this down in other areas, again, with other work that I do in female sexuality, between dominance and submission. Are you in a dominant state, or are you in a submissive state? Do you present as in a constant dominant state, but behind closed doors, quote, you are seeking to be submissive? Are you in a submissive state in most areas of your life, but what you're craving is a dominant partner? Then I think these are things that we can kind of ask ourselves as we navigate more understanding around masculinity and femininity, masculine energy, feminine energy. But are we in a crisis? No, we're not in a crisis. We are being asked to recognize what we actually want by no longer having to adhere to what we're told we need to be.
Okay. So overall, then you would say like the answer is no. Like there's ample men, out there who are, suitable partners for women overall. Like that's more or less it because of the fact that, sometimes the woman may want someone who is a little bit more submissive, and that would be okay. Is that more or less what you're trying to say?
Yes, yes, that is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I believe there's plenty of wonderful men out there. And yeah,
Okay. Again, like, this is just something that's definitely been brought up, just from like personal friends also too. Like I said, like Jordan Peterson's talked about it a little bit too. And that, but there do seem to be a lot of, men in their 30s, 40s, even 50s who like haven't grown up like whatsoever. Like, do you feel like that's an issue?
yes, so that's a different discussion, and this is actually something that one of the men that I interviewed brought up, which is that a lot of we have a culture of a lot of boys, um, in that there are men who are still reliant on this like I guess you could call it the mother wound. The mother wound within them is unhealed, and I think that that's like a whole other discussion that could be had about like what that actually means. But
Just
um,
to stop you on that just for a sec. I
yeah,
understand what you mean then, just because like, I've been around women who like they try to almost like mother their partner.
yeah,
And to me, that's like it's just so disgusting and like repulsive. Like I can't stand that, So I think it's better, you know, um, for most men anyway, or for all men, I should say, to have someone who's not looking to mother them. Because if you mother them, they're going to stay a child. They're going to stay an infant. They're going to be dependent upon you. And I think that it's best if if you both work, independently and then together.
yes.
So I just wanted to make that point. I didn't mean to.
And this is something that I've been exploring a lot too. Is there is a difference between as a woman being in your mother energy and mothering, and being in mother energy. And when we look at archetypes of the mother, especially as it pertains to, again, like trainings in dominance and submission, it's this ability to give and receive such large, like, just quantities of love. It's love is abundant. You are able to care for so many things. You are able to give birth to so many ideas and projects and conversations, and it's this like sturdiness in guiding. And I think that guiding from a heart-centered place is being in your mother energy. It's also deeply healing to those around you to be in that energy, and that is completely different than mothering, which is nagging or saying what you're doing is not good enough, or feeling like you need to like change your partner. Like, you shouldn't want to. And I think maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I don't think you should necessarily be in a state of judgment about your partner. Like, do you accept them for where they're at or not? And that's not saying like don't have a standard that you set, and if they do something that bothers you, like, that's not saying like don't bring it up and have this discussion with them. But to be in like a mothering state is actually demeaning yourself and your power and your abilities to love this person, um, because instead you're choosing to focus on the things that frustrate you about them, which only perpetuates more frustration.
Okay. And one point I wanted to make too, you were talking about, masculine and feminine. And I saw this video from Tony Robbins about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but he said, like, generally speaking, in the best relationships, there's always a masculine and a feminine energy. Now, most of the time, you know, the man's going to be masculine, the woman's going to be feminine, but not necessarily all the time. And he pointed out in that video, like even not even, but you know, even or sorry, homosexuals know this because like there's always I forget the terms, but there's always a top and a
Bottom.
bottom. Okay, top and bottom. So like one is always more dominant than the other, and that's kind of the same way in lesbian relationships as well, right? And then one interesting point he made though was under stress, like men tend to get more feminine and women tend to get more masculine. And I can see what he means by that because when men are under stress, you're like, oh, I just don't want to do it. I just don't want to deal with it. Get out of my face. Like I'm going away. I'm not dealing with it. You know, which, you know, that it's kind of harsh to label that as like, you know, feminine because feminine can be beautiful. Like really that's just like not taking responsibility in some ways, whereas you know with females, you know, when they get stressed, oftentimes they do lash out. And like did you ever come across any of that type of work when you were, you know, researching men who take baths, and did that ever come up in conversation at all, like having did anyone struggle, say, with having a partner who was, you know, too masculine for them, or maybe, you know, not feminine enough, anything like that?
It's interesting. It's not so much that men have brought up a partner being too masculine. So let me know if this answers your question. But something that one of the men I interviewed said was that my partner asks of me to be more emotional, which in this case might mean be more feminine. But then as soon as I am, they're turned off by me. So what do you want?
Okay.
And this perspective stuck with me. And I think this comes back to what I was saying, is that if we are asking men to show us more emotion and to be maybe more feminine or more in touch with their feminine side, we have to then accept what comes with that. And if we're going to maintain polarity, which is that tension that creates attraction, the woman then needs to embody masculine energy, to hold that, to make that tension possible. And that's not to say that there's not switches and flips where you some weeks you might be feeling more feminine or more masculine or whatever. But again, like, as women, if we are asking this of men, show us the side of you, are we truly prepared for all that comes with that? Which might be this like wavering in attraction, because we've also been conditioned to desire certain things from men in their masculine energy.
Okay, I appreciate that, and just so people are aware too, you know, I think that it's important to know that like when Nicolle and I are talking about polarity, we're just talking about the difference between masculine and feminine energy. We're not talking about like different values. Like if you want to have a good relationship, like you're gonna have to have some of the same values, some of the same common interests. Like if one person doesn't like traveling, the other person does. Like that has nothing to do with masculine and feminine. That's just, you know, different values. So it's important for people to know that, you know, I think the keys to a good relationship are making sure that you enjoy some of the same things, you have the same values, but also to recognizing the masculine and feminine energies and making sure that you can adapt if one person, you know, switches.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I don't know if acceptance is the word, but really communication. Like, communication is so important. And what I mean by that is not just having conversations about what's on the surface, but really, really being able to communicate all of the other shit that you're going through and that you're experiencing. And I'm reading a book right now called Getting the Love You Want, which has just been a mind-blowing read for me so far, because it talks a lot about the partners we choose and why we choose them. And part of the reason why we choose the people that we love deeply is because they help us heal from childhood wounds. And that's why our partners piss us off so much. And that love is not the beginning of this idyllic paradise or this like, you know, pilgrimage or this like journey together into paradise. It's actually the beginning of a lot of subconscious healing and a lot of deep work from childhood wounds. So when I say communication, what I mean is like self-awareness and your ability to turn yourself inside out for somebody else and show them all the ugly parts of who you are and what makes you human.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. It's a good point to maybe introduce just the concept of like psychedelics. And I know that we touched on this a week ago or so. I mean, it was a couple weeks now, but when people have, because you mentioned about crying and stuff earlier. So when people use psychedelics, they often do cry. I've seen people cry on psychedelics because they just can't believe like the person that they were in some ways, and they feel guilt and shame, and then they start to cry. And then that's actually a very beautiful thing, because it's going to make you much more empathetic. I've never really considered that to be like a feminine thing, and I think like labeling it as feminine is probably demeaning towards women in some way. But there's, you could almost say that that's very courageous, which again I don't want to associate courage just with masculinity. Obviously you can be courageous and be feminine as well, but it's important for people to know that like just because you're in like a vulnerable state, whether you're in a bath, whether you just got beat up in MMA, or whether you just did a bunch of psychedelics, like once you're in that vulnerable state, like you need to embrace it, and you need to learn from it instead of like shunning away from it. That you can't like pretend that like that fight didn't happen. You can't pretend that you didn't cry yesterday after you took those psychedelic medicines. And I think that that's important for people to know. And I do feel that like we talked about, is there any therapeutic value in using the word pussy? Is there any therapeutic value in crying? And I would say that absolutely there is, and there's a lot of deep healing that goes on with that. And that doesn't necessarily have to be associated with, one sex or the other, or one energy or the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's even interesting, right? Like think about where the word courage comes from. It's cur, that means the heart. So yeah, there is a certain aspect of courage to crying if you've been told that showing your emotions is weak. So yeah, I would actually acknowledge and say that for those who cry, whether on psychedelics or not, that is and can be courageous. And thank you for delving into your heart and dredging up whatever is there, that's allowing for this cathartic release and a certain degree of self-acceptance. And I think especially when we look at PTSD and this kind of reconciliation of self, especially with veterans who have witnessed war and who have witnessed hardship and who have caused violence on behalf of their country, and what patriotism is, whose hearts have been hardened by these experiences where it was actually better to close themselves off and feel nothing at all rather than feeling an iota of what they could feel. When you open that back up and you allow your heart to be open and you allow crying to kind of like wash away all the debris that you've built up in front of yourself by repressing all of these memories and not working through them, you are going to experience life again. Because life well lived is a breadth of emotion.
Agreed.
And I think that is what's so beautiful about tapping into that. And when you look at tears, it's like, oh, all of that is just finally coming out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's seven different, human emotions, and we all experience them, all the time. And, that's something that we need to learn to, embrace. And this comes back to a little bit of a different subject, but people feel like they need to be, happy all the time, so to speak. And in some cases,
that way, psychopaths, come on.
and in some cases, maybe some males feel need they be like ultra masculine all the time, or some females feel that they need to be like ultra feminine all the time. Whereas like I think what one of the points that you've made is that, like, if you're, a man and you're feeling feminine, like, just embrace it. If you're a woman and you're feeling masculine, just embrace it. All these things kind of like pass. Like, you felt angry before, but you know what? That goes away. You felt sad before, that goes away. You felt surprised before, that goes away. Like, all these things pass. So I think that, like, when these types of feelings come up, instead of trying to suppress them, it's better just to, like, embrace it, figure it out, maybe get a little bit introspective with it, and then try to take some type of value from it, and think about it, instead of just trying to, like, repress it and kind of getting upset at yourself for, feeling that particular way. Right. So, like, don't get, like if you're a man and you're feeling feminine, like, don't get mad at yourself for feeling feminine. Or if you're a woman and you're feeling masculine, don't get, like, mad at yourself for feeling that way. Just try to, embrace the emotion, and more or less learn from it.
Yeah, and I think, especially as we start to push back against the ideas of gender, this is going to become easier. Oh my gosh. Can you hear that? It's just construction outside my window.
Luckily, we can't, but unfortunately, we really are running out of time, Nicolle. And I thought I was going to be able to ask you about all your brains, and it seems like we only got partway through to the men who take baths. So, you definitely have to come back on. I'm putting you on it. So, before I let you go, Nicolle, just tell everyone where they can find you. Maybe just briefly tell everyone too about, the other brands that you have on the go in your book, and how they can find that and purchase it.
Yeah, honestly, the easiest thing is if you have Instagram, follow me there. It's at Nicolle double L. That's Nicolle, the word double and then another L. I'm sure you have show notes and you can put it in there. That's kind of a portal to all of the things that I'm working on. The three main ones really are Men Who Take Baths, my campaign to rebrand virginity to sexual debut, and Girls Who Say Fuck, which is the publisher of the Orgasm book. It's a Dr. Seuss style book about orgasms called Oh, the Places You'll Go, Oh, Oh. And that's also where I run all of my workshops, where I help women remember power through the lens of BDSM, specifically dominance and submission.
Awesome. Well, a lot of information there and a lot of stuff you can learn from Nicolle. So definitely go check her out. And again, congratulations, Nicolle, on all your success with everything, on getting in the men's health article. And thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.